Today's episode, we have our friend Guy Caruso. We are going to discuss SRV. Guy, welcome to Where the Rim Ends. We are so glad to have you today.
I'm great to be here, Bryce and Summer. Thanks for inviting me.
Guy, if you want to briefly introduce yourself to our listeners, and kind of give a brief synopsis of who you are and what you do, that would be greatly appreciated.
Oh, thanks, Bryce. Yeah. So again, my name's Guy Caruso. I work for the Institute on Disabilities at Temple University, which is a federally funded program. Um, and I'm here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I've been working in the field of disabilities for over 50 years, and I've been very blessed to have the opportunity to meet with and work with a number of the leaders in the field of disabilities. And Dr. Wolf Wolfensberger was my initial mentor, who back in the early 70s, when I was going to grad school, I was just blessed to have the chance to take a course by him on normalization, as it was called back then, and to take a number of workshops with him. He really introduced me to people with disabilities and other professionals. So my career has been really, trying to help people with disabilities to have a good life like anybody else. So that was sort of my beginning. I'm blessed to have a lovely wife and 6 kids, and get to do partners in policy making around the country, and where I got to meet you two guys, which was great. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation today, Bryce and Summer.
Absolutely. So that'll lead us into the first question here. So for SRV, how would you describe that to somebody that would want that in plain language?
Yeah, thanks, Bryce. So SRV, the acronym, stands for Social Role Valorization. And Dr. Wolfensberger was the creator of that. And probably had to start with back in the early 70s, Wolfensberger wrote a book called The Principle of Normalization, which was a game changer for families and for people with disabilities and young professionals like me, who the major model of services to people back then was institutional services. And Wolfensberger wrote this book to really sort of break the back of the institution and get people out of institutions. And he wrote the book Normalization back then. And back in the 1980s, he sort of moved away from that idea, and he came up with the idea of social role valorization. So to respond to your question, Bryce, social role valorization really is about helping people who have historically been devalued to have valued roles in life like anybody else. And the intent of that, if you're in a valued role, you have a good chance of having the good things in life, because people are going to see you in
Right.
a um, valued way, and not in the historical devalued ways they've seen you. So it's having valued roles so that you can live a life like anybody else.
So that leads into part two of my question. How do you think it's evolved since Dr. Wolfensberger introduced it in the late 1970s?
How did this idea evolve around social role valorization? I think, as I expressed, normalization was a book written back in the 1970s. It was an idea that came out of Scandinavia, that people should just live a normal life like anybody else. And for around 10 years, Wolf sort of, that idea was put into legislation around the country. There was workshops teaching normalization, and its evaluation tool, PASS, program analysis of service systems. So you could actually use this idea of normalization and really look at services to see, are they really helping people to have a typical valued life like anybody else? What Wolfensberger experienced is that normalization was really great at getting people into the community. So families now were, rather than having just the institutional model as the option, their kids could go to school. They could maybe get a job at a sheltered workshop. They could live in a group home. Um, but those programs oftentimes were in the community, but people with disabilities still were not part of community. So
Right.
Wolfensberger really walked away from normalization and re-envisioned it that what really got people connected to community was not just you got to be in community. That's the first step. That's crucially important. But you've got to really be seen in a valued way in community as well. So he really concentrated on getting people not to be seen in their devalued roles, but helping people to enter valued roles. And valued roles then provided the opportunity for people to get really connected, to have relationships with others, to be part of the community, not just in community. So that was the real shift from normalization, being in community, to social role valorization, being part of community. And what families want is for their sons and daughters to be seen as part of their community, be involved in the community.
Right.
Just like what you've done it with your life, Bryce, of being involved in sports and athletics and being part of the community. Who doesn't want that? People with disabilities want that, as well as do family members. But normalization just got us so far, but not far enough. So that's why
Absolutely.
Wolfensberger, he could have rested on his laurels with that concept. I mean, it was worldwide known, but he walked away from it that said, we got to do better. People got to be part of community and not just in community. So I hope that answers your question, Bryce.
Absolutely.
Guy, could you share an example of a service or program that really embodies SRV principles?
Yeah, I think I'm not going to name specific entities, Summer, but I'll give you some
Yeah,
ideas around that. So, an employment program that isn't about sheltered work, because sheltered work it might be in the community, but typically it's not. You're in a setting that's isolated from community, grouped with other people with disabilities. True supported employment is going to probably ask you what you're interested in doing. Michael Callahan with, you know, the work that he's done on customized employment. You sort of ask people what their interests are, what their talents are, where their skill sets lie. You then connect that person to a job in a community that's based on those interests and whatnot. The person is seen as a worker, not as a client. They're seen in a valued way, and they have a job. And they might have a job coach, but hopefully for a very short period of time, because a job coach gets in the way of people being really part of that workforce of that potential employer. So a really good supported employment program is going to get a person a job in the community where they have a valued role, they get the same wages as everybody else, the same benefits, and they're part of the community. Another example would be going off to college. Uh, you know, I said I've been in the field for 50 years, and probably 50 years ago, I would never have believed that people with intellectual disabilities would even be considered for a college program. But now there's like 400 plus programs around the United States where individuals with intellectual disabilities, including autism, can go off to college. Now, a college program could be people with disabilities on the campus in their own classes, but not integrated in a college community. So a good example, Millersville University, for example, in Millersville, Pennsylvania, has a program, integrated studies for students with intellectual disabilities, where they are from the get-go part of the college campus. The students with intellectual disabilities take courses like anybody else. They're not taking special courses. They're not taking specialized courses just for the disabled. They're not living in a dorm with special students. They're not in clubs with special students. They are fully integrated into the college campus with the supports that they need. They're not just dropped there. No, they're given the supports they need. But what this has shown, we have a whole network of colleges and universities here in Pennsylvania that really are focusing on inclusive post-secondary education, where students join clubs like anybody else, fraternities. Temple University has a leadership and career studies program where I work for Temple. The program in Philadelphia, um, students get jobs on campus like anybody else. They attend classes like anybody else. They have the accommodations they need like anybody else. They join fraternities. They go to Temple athletic events. That's what I'm talking about. That's the sort of thing. Now, residentially, when you're talking about it, um, uh, social role valorization isn't about group homes. Group homes are home-like. They're in the community, but again, people are part of a group, right? Oftentimes a group they didn't choose to be with, but that's how we've
Right.
provided services historically. Um, That's not social role valorization. Again, it starts with asking the person and their family, where do they want to live? Who do they want to live with anybody, if they want to even live with anybody? What supports would they need to be able to be supported positively in a community? So when you look at it residentially, you're really looking at people living where they want to live, with whom they want to live, with the supports that they need. And again, not a group home model. This is more of a individualized, person-centered, family-focused setting for people to be. So those are sort of three examples on employment, on education, and on residential. Now, if you're looking at young kids, well, young kids go to school and they should be involved in school at the very get go with their peers and their neighborhood. I mean, that's how you would look at this. Now, it's easier said than done, isn't it, Summer? I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot of obstacles that get in the way of people having the good things in life because there's so many mindsets and negative expectations and stereotypes about people with
Yes.
disabilities that trap them in a world of congregation and segregation and not being part of. So close and yet so far.
What would you say, because I'm seeing some pushback online. Um, I'm seeing a lot of comments from parents with typical kids, and they say it's not fair to have a child with special needs in the classroom with my child. It's a distraction. It's hurting my child's education. What would you say to parents like that?
Well, this again comes down to a support question. I think, again, uh, I believe a child with a disability, if the family is so inclined, should be in a regular classroom with their age peers, with the supports that they need. Now, if the supports aren't there, then that can be, an imposition on other kids in that classroom. So it is not just being in classes; it's getting the supports that you need. But even still, all students need supports. This is not unique to children with disabilities. I mean, a lot of kids, struggle. They have behavioral issues and they're not necessarily labeled as being disabled. So I think we need to be, again, providing the appropriate supports to all students, and that includes students with disabilities. Um, I also think there's a learning curve for everybody. I think the earlier you start this process, the better. So at the get go, kids should be going into integrated kindergartens, integrated preschools. I think there's a benefit to the child with a disability as well as to the child without the disability. We learn about difference, and the life is about difference. We're all unique. We learn about that aspects of it. Students with disabilities have a lot to teach people, students without disabilities, and vice versa. And just I think that opportunity at an early age really shapes our kids all in a positive way. And it's not about difference. It's about, you know, uh, how alike we all are, rather than how different the world sometimes paints us to be.
Speaking about schools, how do you think schools could better implement SRV than how they're doing it now?
Thanks so much, Bryce. So I think one of the things about schools is mindsets. Okay, so schools really need to change their mindsets. I think because they have very low expectations for students with disabilities, and if you have low expectations, guess what you get? You get low expectations. So
Correct.
schools themselves have trapped themselves in this mindset of low expectations. They also tend to treat students with disabilities. Um, Oftentimes much younger than they are. They have, that's part of the mindset. They see a person with a disability as a child, and not as a teenager or as a person who's 12 years old or 10 years old. They sort of treat a person in very, again, with all the best intentions, but they with the low expectations. They don't see the person really having much competence, so they treat them childish, very childish, and that
Right.
doesn't help a child grow. The language they use sometimes is demeaning. Again, they don't mean it, but that's how it happens. They treat a person very childlike, so those can be problematic for schools. Also, they don't really have demanding criteria, a curriculum. They water it down because they don't provide the right context for students with disabilities, and therefore students with disabilities are not going to enter the world of work because there's low expectations on them. So schools mean well, um, but also schools, they're a lot of the teachers themselves come out of the special education world, and um, unfortunately, that criteria isn't based on social role valorizations. It's based on um, older ways of thinking about students with disabilities. So, to me, it's higher expectations. It's not treating students, with disabilities any different than you would treat any other child in that school. It's having really curriculum that challenges the students with the appropriate supports. I mean, I think those are ways that we can change things, and it's really, again, not congregating. Schools tend to congregate students with disabilities together. That doesn't work. What happens is students with disabilities learn how to be disabled. They're around other disabled peers. If you're disabled, you need to be around regular kids so you can
Right.
learn both the
Yeah.
good and the bad stuff, but
Right.
you're gonna be able to model and imitate what's appropriate, what clear expectations are. You're also gonna change the mindsets of those kids to see disability as natural, because it's gonna happen.
Absolutely.
Disability is not unique. It happens to all of us. So I think those are the factors that need to be changed, and that's what schools, unfortunately, still hold on to those really archaic sort of ideas around education.
What can parents do today to help their child hold better values in the community?
Well, again, parents have to, it starts at square one. They've got to have really high expectations for their child. So they've got to um, not see their child for their disability. I think parents get looped into a mindset because of the professionals in the medical field. They focus on the limitations and what their kid can't do. That's sort of how the professionals focus things. So parents, one, need to really have high expectations for their sons and daughters, and they need to know their skill sets. They need to know their talents, their abilities, their interests. They need to know what they're good at, what they're interested in. So I think that's one thing. I think the other thing is parents need to not let their kids get segregated. I mean, that's the first thing that schools want to do, is segregate children with disabilities to be with other children with disabilities. So you have to fight that. And you got to align yourself with other families who've been successful in getting their children integrated into a regular school environment with everybody else. I think also families need to reach out and get educated. I think Partners in Policymaking is a wonderful program that really helps families and people with disabilities work together to learn what's possible. So, high expectations, not letting schools segregate, getting away from that language that sort of identifies a child with a disability. I mean, language is so powerful, and children get labeled, and therefore other children see the child with a disability as having a disability because the language sort of identifies that. So you got to work on your language, um, uh, look at the skill sets. Don't get stuck into segregation and congregation. Have high expectations. Really look at the curriculum and the supports that your child needs. So I think those are some of the avenues I would suggest to a family. But don't be sold a bill of goods. I think the system means well, but it's so invested in segregation and congregation, and families need to fight that, because it's when kids get to model other kids and work side by side. That's the game changer. That's what makes things really different.
I was really fortunate because my daughter, when she started early intervention, she had a speech therapist that really encouraged me. He said, "You need to sit with her at the table, small increments, get her ready for school." And when she was evaluated to transition out of early intervention, they told me, they said, "She's ready for school." I would sit down with her 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, and have her do a task, just like as if she was going to school. And they said, "She's ready for school." And then I was fortunate enough, like her school now, I put her in a private preschool, so she went in with typical kids without any really support aside from a couple of teacher aides.
Mhm.
And then now she's in public school now, but she's in the mainstream classroom. She's able to be in there 80 to 90% of the time. Um, but I feel like I accidentally fell into that, because when I went into partners, I was really in I was really visualizing her schooling as her going into being in a sped room the majority of the time. But her school was very, like, we're gonna get her in the mainstream class. And then I went to Partners and I was like, "Oh, my school's doing it right." And so I tell this story just because I realized that not a lot of parents just accidentally fall into that system. Like, they don't fall into a system that is doing it well. And I really want parents to hear this so they can advocate for that. So they can advocate for the early intervention to prepare your child for the classroom and prepare your child, like you said, have those high expectations, because I didn't feel like, looking back on it, I may not have had her prepared except to have such a great system. Um, but aside from that, also, how can siblings and extended family support SRV with children with disabilities or even adults that have disabilities?
Yeah, let me just uh, I'll do the sibling question in a second, but let me just speak to what you said, Summer, about, not yourself not having the mindset about, you were almost expecting your daughter to go into a segregated setting because that's all you knew, right? That's what you learned. That's what we predominantly still provide oftentimes. So you were lucky to have a school that was so, wow, they had high expectations, they had seen things differently. So a lot of this for families is that we're unconscious. We're unconscious of what we've learned. We often learn from where we've gone to school ourselves. When I went to school, you never saw a child with a disability. They were either hidden in the basement or they were elsewhere. They weren't in the school. So, part of this is, as a parent, you've got to be clear. One of the biggest mistakes families make, you have a child born without a disability and you have all these high hopes. You are just dreaming the future. You're just positive. But we've taught families when they have a child with a disability to have a whole different mindset, not to have those big dreams, not to have those high hopes. In fact, just the opposite, right? To have low expectations, don't have any dreams. I think that's the biggest mistake. I think families should treat a child with a disability as they would any other child that they have without a disability. But you got to look at the support question. You've got to look at the vulnerability question, the safety question, all those things. But don't give up your dreams. Don't give up your hopes. You want that child to have a life like anybody else. But oftentimes, the system pushes against that. You were blessed to have a school that was so, embracing of this idea and supportive of it. Many families have to fight tooth and nail to get what you were able to get from your school, Summer. So again, it is that we got to be very conscious for the changes that we want and have dreams and expectations that are really high. Then when you talk about siblings, it's some of the same stuff. Siblings should be treating their sibling just like they would any other sibling. Okay. There should be no change in the game plan. Siblings should have, high expectations. They should expect their brother or sister to do the same things they're doing with the appropriate supports. They should not get led down the road of using disability language. They should just talk about their brother or sister like they would any other brother and sister, you know, and who maybe happens to have cerebral palsy. But you don't even need to use that language until people start to say, gee, what's up with so and so? And you can say, well, he has cerebral palsy, but that's my brother. And this is what he's going to do.
Right.
Um, they need to support their sibling with a disability to be around other people without disabilities. I mean, to be part of the group, part of the crowd. Um, I think they just need to, if that sibling likes to ride a bike, well, why couldn't their brother or sister with a disability not ride a bike? And you might have to get a bike that is adapted, but it should be the same sort of life that the sibling is existing and using. So I think siblings play a crucial role in introducing their brothers and sisters, particularly if they're younger or older, to their peer group and having their peer group, become friends with their brothers and sisters. So it's the same sort of uh, deal, I think. But what happens is the mindsets, and siblings get mindsets just like their parents. The mindset typically is that disability is not okay, that it's a problem, when in fact, it's your brother, it's your sister. Treat them like you would anybody else. and move forward with the appropriate supports that you need. And sometimes we've got to support those siblings too. And as a family, making sure siblings are getting a fair shake too. Sometimes I think parents, because we focus so much on the child with a disability, we don't spend enough time with the other siblings. So you got to balance that as a family member. Special time with siblings, special time with each sibling. So just being mindful of that, and letting the sibling have a life too, letting them go out and do the things they would do, but also making sure they're taking care of their brothers and sisters as they would any brother or sister, disabled or not.
How does the way we talk about disability influence social roles?
Yeah. Yeah, Bryce, that's a great question. And I'm sure you've experienced this yourself in your own life, is, when people use disparaging language and words to
Yes.
you and make you feel like you're a child when you're an adult,
Yes.
concentrating on your disability and not on your assets and your skills and your talents and your abilities. Language is powerful. It's one of the first avenues by which we separate ourselves from each other. There's us and them, the disabled and then the non-disabled. So I think language is a very powerful avenue. And historically, we've talked about people with disabilities, one as being eternal children, as never growing up. And I know, as an adult, when people treat you like a child, Bryce, you must get really annoyed
I
and
do.
like, what the
Mhm.
heck, why are you doing this? A mindset. People don't mean poorly by it, but that language is really powerful, and it treats you less than. People treat you as a child. They treat you as being sick or disabled. The one that's the worst, I think, Bryce, is pity and charity, right? Like,
Yes.
pat you on the head, sing song
Yes.
language. I mean, it's just, um, again, people mean well by it, but it just, language is the sort of the first step in separating people from each other. So I think we've really got to rid ourselves of that language. The media is really stuck on it. We see it in magazines, we see it on TV shows, we see it, on YouTube, we see it in all sorts of places, and people with disabilities have been fighting against it. There's you know, the No R campaign. Not
Yeah.
using that word
Correct. Yep.
retarded. Which is just like a curse word. Um, so there's been a big pushback against this. It changes. I mean, we're dealing with it again in the present climate that we're living in, and we see the impact that language has, particularly when people in powerful positions use demeaning language. The power of that on how people get perceived and treated. So I think you're right. Language is very powerful, and we need to use very valuing language. Get away from that disabled language, and certainly not treat people with disabilities as the other or as a child forever. You know, and not as pity and charity. That does not help at all. And what happens, it makes people with disabilities come to think of themselves in that way when that's not in fact who they are at all. So um, yeah, we really got to think about the power of language and how it impedes the good life for people with disabilities.
We just had a woman on, she has a 23-year-old son that has Down syndrome, and she talked about the hate she got online when she shared when he turned 21, they let him have a drink. And the hate, she said the hate that she got online because he got to have a drink of beer when he turned 21. He's a 23-year-old young man that has Down syndrome, and everybody in their mind, he's a child. It's like giving a child a drink of alcohol, but that's not the case.
Yeah,
Um, and
yeah, yeah.
I'll say I fought that when I found out that I was pregnant with my daughter, and she found out she had Down syndrome, and I was looking online, and I would see people with Down syndrome, adults with Down syndrome, having a glass of wine, and I was just like in shock because I didn't know any better, and now I realize they're not forever children. They're adults that have a disability.
Well, we have a whole history to fight against, right? I mean,
Mhm.
we're all raised, by our own families who've been influenced by their families and influenced by what the culture has said about people with disabilities. So we're unconscious, oftentimes, of what we've learned. We've got mindsets, that, a person with Down syndrome is a child forever. That's a mindset, and, we now see people with with Down syndrome on TV as actors, people as, keynote speakers at conferences, people with Down syndrome, getting married, um, attending college, um, getting jobs, starting their own businesses. I mean,
Yes.
we've got to change the mindsets. That's what it comes down to. So that, the example you gave about, just the harsh criticism about a young person with Down syndrome turning 21 and having a drink, that's part of the good life. We all want the good life. And why should a disability prevent you from having the good things in life? Many of us have probably had too many drinks on occasion, and, and some of us choose not to drink at all. And that's part of choice in life. But, I've not, any person I've met with a disability, they want to have a life like anybody else with all the ups and downs, with the hurts that happen sometimes, this dignity of risk. You've got to try things, I mean, to learn. People with disabilities are going to make mistakes like we all have.
Yes.
But why not have a drink? Why not get married? Why not? We have laws that prevent people with disabilities from getting married because
Yes.
it will impact their income.
Correct.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
like we got to get away from these things. People with disabilities are making contributions like anybody else. They
Right.
have jobs. They're members of their community. They're joining clubs. They're doing. They're artists. They're in church.
Yeah.
And at some point, all of us are going to have a disability. All of us, if we don't have one
Yes.
already. So
Yes.
why, I know when I become disabled, uh, I want to still live a good life, you know. So I think we have a lot of work to do. Again, not to throw stones at people who say these things, they mean well by it. But the realities are people with disabilities are people first. They should live
Right.
a life like anybody else. And Wolfensberger talks about this, some of his language puts people off. He talks about the conservatism corollary. And, in life, you look at the normal curve, it's what's something we all expect at certain points in time. When you become 21, the big deal is you get to drink in some states, okay? Some states it's earlier, okay? So that's the normal curve. Now, do you just let a person go off and get drunk and drive a car and do bad things? I hope not, you know,
Right.
but you try to set
Right.
clear expectations. But when you turn, an adult, what do you expect? Get a job, earn some money, do something meaningful. Why would we expect anything less for a person with a disability?
Right. Right.
Dating, you expect that at a certain age. At each age, things change for us. Okay. And I'm at the age now where maybe I'll get to retire. And that's part of the expectation too. Okay. So we have a lot of work to do. And again, I don't throw stones at the people who say these things. They mean well, but they're uninformed. They're unconscious. They need to change their mindsets. And we need to, as families, we need to model positive, pictures of people with disabilities doing positive things, being in the community, living in the community, going to school, you know, dressing as an adult would dress, getting a job. We need to help change those negative mindsets that people have. It's not going to happen overnight, but we're seeing it. We're seeing people with disabilities speaking up for themselves, making choices, getting jobs, living in the community, getting married. We're changing that scenario every day, and it's moms like you, Summer, who make that happen with your own child. Being out in the community and doing things that anybody else would do.
I'm hoping so. We're working on getting her into some dance lessons and doing some extracurricular stuff, and I'm just starting to realize, like, school's not enough. We need to get, just like my other kids got to do T-ball and stuff. So
Yeah.
we're starting to do that. But Guy, tell me, like, you kinda touched on it, but what are some things that give you hope about the future for SRV?
Yeah, so for social role valorization, some of the things that give me hope at least. I think one of it is people with disabilities wanting to live the good life. So they're, by their very example, by what they do, you start to see what's possible. Okay. We're seeing students with disabilities, in regular classrooms in school now. That's a huge change because it really shows the value of a student being in a valued social role by being a student, being in a classroom. And now that we're seeing students go off to college. I mean, what a huge change. We see students with disabilities or young people with disabilities working jobs in the community. We're seeing people with disabilities on TV in valued roles, being seen in valued roles, not in that pity charity model, but just really being in a valued role like anybody else. We're seeing laws like the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Olmstead uh, uh, legislation and other legislation, the ABLE Act that allows families now to put money aside for for their kids, like a 529 plan for a child without a disability. So families can start to save dollars when historically you couldn't put money aside. You'd have to hide it in a pillow, under your mattress. But now you can do it with no negative, repercussions so that you can have money set aside for your child when they become an adult to do things, whether that's get a house, go to college, whatever it happens to be. So I think there's a lot of very positive things occurring now, um, that really are changing, how people perceive people with disabilities and what the future might be. And that really reinforced the importance of valued social roles for people with disabilities.
What is the biggest thing that you learned since you have been an instructor and partners in policymaking?
So I think partners in policymaking, it's I think it's almost 40 years old now. Thank goodness for Colleen Wick and the folks in Minnesota who created the program because they really saw that there weren't family members of people with disabilities speaking up for what is needed for people to have the good things in life. The opposing forces were speaking about segregation and congregation and whatnot. So partisan policymaking has just really provided an opportunity for people with disabilities and family members to really learn about advocacy, to learn about change, so to hear from experts um, uh, in the country about ideas and things that would make a difference in their lives. What I've learned personally, and I've been able to uh, present at Partners in Policymaking probably in 10 different states and even in Saipan at one point in my life, is that families know what to do. They really do. They get it, but they've been sort of duped into thinking something else. The systems that now exist really are about congregation and segregation, about low expectations. So families have been sold a bill of goods that they know better. So once you start to talk to families and you help them to be conscious of what they really want for their sons and daughters, not by that bill of goods that they've been sold by professionals and others, families and people with disabilities, they are the future. They're going to bring the change about. Any good thing that's really happened in human services has been because of families really taking on the system, making the changes. It was families who helped close the institutions. It was families who helped create sheltered employment and, special education. That wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for families. Now, is that enough? No. Now families don't want sheltered workshops. They don't want special education. They want inclusion. They want to be part of. They want the good things in life for their sons and daughters. Partners in policymaking, I think, Bryce and Summer, as you're so well aware, has really opened the eyes and provided a map for the future,
Yeah.
what's possible for people. It's also given them the skill sets, how to not be quiet, how to speak up, how to talk to legislators, how to join school boards, how to join boards and committees, how to really have a voice and be active and be involved. It's given people with disabilities a sense of ego and pride and self-esteem, where perhaps they didn't have that same pride beforehand, because it's given them now an understanding of why this segregation and congregation devaluation exists. It's been there to sort of hold you back. So I have high praise for partners in policymaking around the country. It's created a cadre of leaders, of advocates. It's brought people with disabilities and families together to learn from one another about what's possible. And I've been blessed just to be part of that with my good friend Al Condalucci. We go, and have an opportunity to share our knowledge and our experience. But I have learned so much from the very families I get a chance to speak with and be with, and people with disabilities like yourself, Bryce, who really want that future, want the good things in life, and aren't going to sit back and let it not be given to them. They're going to work hard to really advance the cause, so to speak. So again, I think that's partners. I couldn't speak more highly of the program.
Well, I appreciate the compliment for sure.
Bryce and I were talking before we got on here about what a pleasure was to hear from you and Al at Partners in Policymaking, and how that really enlightened us. And um, I've taken what you guys taught us every day in my life in raising Julia. I think back on it often, and I often pull out my notes from Partners in Policymaking, from
Mhm.
Guy Caruso and Al Condalucci and all the other greats. So it's definitely a real asset to families.
Well, it goes the other way though too, Summer and Bryce. You guys really inform us as well as to the situations you're experiencing, what needs to occur. The other great thing about partners is that it's you have a cadre of people that you come to know,
Right.
families with younger kids, families with older kids. People with disabilities who are employed and others who are trying to find their way. So there's so much learning that goes between those families and people with disabilities as well. You find out you're not alone. There's other people in the same boat as you, and you guys oftentimes know more than I know or Al would know because you're dealing with it every day, and you're great resources to one another. You're great, friends to one another. You're there, through the thick and thin. So I think that's the other aspect of partners is it creates a network of people. I know recently in Louisiana, um, they got partners together from like 15 years. They had a whole get together for people who'd gone through partners over the course of 15 different years. Just think about that. If you got 20 people, 15 years, that number of people and that cadre of people you've helped create that are advocating and bringing about change, and talking to their legislators and their school boards and their PTOs and all that stuff. I mean, it creates a really a catalyst for change. So I think that's the other wonderful aspect of partners in policymaking. And again, I've been just really lucky to be able to be part of that.
One of the final questions that we like to ask at the end of the podcast is one of my favorite questions as we're wrapping up here. What do you want your legacy to be, Guy?
Yeah, that's a big question, Bryce. Legacy. I guess for me, I think part of it is I see myself as someone trying to raise consciousness, trying to help families and people with disabilities see what's possible. Okay. See that why would you think any less for your child with a disability than your child without a disability? To have hopes and dreams and to really think in a positive way and to really, support their child to live a good life. So I think part of my legacy, I guess, is being a voice for change, being a voice for advocacy, and helping to change mindsets to help people see what's possible. What could be done. And so I've been at it for 50 years now, Bryce. So um, I wanted to be a doctor early in my career, and that didn't work out. Um, um, because I thought healing was really important. But I think my legacy is I've helped families maybe heal from the hurts they've experienced by a system that keeps them trapped in segregation, congregation, and devaluation. And my little piece has been maybe to help people to see things a bit differently, to see what's possible to bring about change. And if I've had any success at that, I'd be really happy for that to happen. And I've seen a number of my friends with disabilities, move out of segregated settings, move out of sheltered workshops, get jobs, have friends, have relationships, live in the community, go off to college. Um, I'm proud of that. I'm proud of that little piece of change I've been able to be part of in my many years working in this field. So thanks for that question, Bryce.
Well, I expect that you've probably been a part of more change than you realized,
I would have to agree with that.
because I think that everyone that has the opportunity to hear you speak on SRV and just your touch your wisdom, I know that you changed the direction for my parenting for my daughter, and I so appreciate that. Before we wrap it up today, do you have anything you want to say to anybody that's listening today?
Well, I think there's a lot of obstacles and barriers that exist, that will continue to exist because devaluation is the enemy and is real. It's not going away. We're all sort of been bred in this us and them mindset. And I think we're all more alike than different. And I think we've got to think about that and also think about, disability as an equal opportunity club. Anybody can join at any given day, is what Ed Roberts of the independent living movement said. So at some point, your parents are going to become disabled, your grandparents, and you yourself. You got to ask yourself, what would I want? When I become disabled or have someone in my life disabled, what would I want for myself or for them? My sense is it's the good things in life. Who doesn't want that? To be in community, to have friendships, to have relationships, be loved, to give love. So I think that's, how you practice your life is either going to come back to help or haunt you. And my sense is that we should all be working toward a life where we're all included, we're all part of it, because at some point it's going to come back and it's going to be your turn. And I hope there's people who support me when I become disabled to continue on living the life I want to live. So I guess that's my final thoughts on this. And social role valorization, SRV, isn't the only game in town. There's, people have faith belief, people have political beliefs, people have, just moral beliefs. But I think social role valorization, because it is about combating devaluation and then helping people to be in valued roles, really does have some traction in bringing about change for people. It's not perfect, um, but it has some really good, in its 10 ideas about change. One, you got to be conscious, you know, you know, t- and it ends on people having friendships and relationships like anybody else. And it's all about competence and it's all about imagery. People have to be imaged in a positive way and they've got to be competent. So it really is not a bad idea to help bring about change. So if people are interested, if you just look up socialrolevalorization.com, there's a whole website that gives you lots of information, resources, articles, links to other things, training opportunities. So if you're interested in it, look that up. It certainly, I think, has been helpful to many families and people with disabilities. And it certainly has been what I've valued over the course of my 50 years, working in the field. So, Bryce and Summer, thank you so much for this opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. We are delighted to have you on the show.
And we'll share that link in the description of this podcast also and on our social media to help people find it a little bit easier. So, yeah, we so appreciate you being here today. It's been a pleasure, and I will let Bryce sign us off.
Well, before we sign off, I just have to share this little funny tidbit. When we started this podcast, my co host had kind of a dream all star list of people that she wanted on the podcast. And Al Condalucci and Guy Caruso were on the top of her list. So
Yep.
the all star list has been checked off. So far. So we are so glad to have Dr. Guy Caruso on Where the Ramp Ends today. And hopefully, this is one of many conversations with you, Guy. It was wonderful to have you on the podcast. And for Where the Ramp Ends, I'm Bryce.
I'm Summer.
This is Where the Ramp Ends and where your journey begins. Bye bye.